The year is 1942. The Second World War is being decided not on the scorched plains of the Eastern Front or the sands of North Africa, but in the icy, unforgiving vastness of the North Atlantic. This was the most critical theater of the war, a logistical artery that ran between the industrial might of America and the besieged resilience of Great Britain. If this lifeline were cut, Britain would starve. The Soviet Union would be deprived of crucial Lend-Lease supplies, and the D-Day invasion would become a strategic impossibility. The man winning this war was Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat fleet. Dönitz was a brilliant, ruthless strategist who didn't fight with battleships. He fought with wolves, tightly coordinated wolf packs that struck convoys with terrifying precision. The secret to his success, the source of his confidence, was absolute: the Enigma machine. Enigma was the Kriegsmarine's technological shield, encrypting all U-boat communications with a complexity that baffled the greatest minds of the Allied nations. For the German U-boat crews, the code was infallible, a mathematical certainty that guaranteed the secrecy of their plans. For the Allies, it was a silent, invisible executioner in the cold, secretive halls of Bletchley Park. The elite team of British codebreakers, including the genius Alan Turing, had achieved miracles reading earlier, less complex versions of the Enigma code. This intelligence, codenamed Ultra, saved countless ships. However, the Germans were constantly upgrading their security. In early 1942, the German Navy introduced the four-rotor Enigma machine for its U-boat fleet, codenamed Triton by the Germans, or Shark by the British. The addition of this fourth rotor exponentially multiplied the number of possible settings, plunging Bletchley Park back into darkness. It was a mathematical catastrophe. For 10 agonizing months, the blackout period, the U-boat messages became utterly unreadable. The Atlantic Gap, the mid-ocean area beyond the range of immediate air cover, turned into a graveyard. Dönitz's wolf packs operated with impunity, coordinated by an unseen network that the Allies could not touch. Sinkings soared to unsustainable rates. Ships were lost faster than they could be built, and the psychological terror inflicted upon the merchant sailors and U.S. Navy escorts was immense. The air of desperation within the Allied High Command was thick. They were losing the Battle of the Atlantic, and they knew it. The human equation, why math was not enough. Alan Turing and his mathematicians understood the problem. Pure cryptanalysis alone, given the constraints of wartime technology, might take years to solve the four-rotor machine. To break the code daily, they needed an entry point, a consistent piece of information that would allow them to align the new, complex rotor configurations. They needed the crib, a verifiable guess of what a specific encrypted message contained. If they knew that message X, sent at time T, always contained word Y, they could start the decryption process. The U-boats were too successful, too remote, and too well-disciplined to leave behind any physical evidence. The codebreakers realized that the required continuous crib would not be found in complex mathematics, but in the simplest, most easily exploitable weakness: human behavior and routine. The highest priority for Allied naval intelligence shifted from sinking U-boats to capturing code materials, the short signal books, the key setting sheets, and the Enigma machines themselves. While these captures, such as the famous boarding of the U-505, a later, massive victory, were vital for understanding the physical machines, they only offered snapshots of the code at specific moments. To achieve continuous, real-time decryption, to truly win the war, Bletchley Park required a continuous feed of procedural intelligence. This intelligence would, ironically, be supplied directly by the enemy during the brutal, immediate aftermath of their sinkings. The ultimate key to the Enigma code was already on board the U-boats, not in their safe, but in their prisons, the terrorized, exhausted American and British survivors being pulled from the sea. The final fatal irony of the war was being set into motion. The U.S. Navy sailors and merchant mariners captured were instructed to reveal nothing of military significance. But the U-boat commanders, convinced of Enigma's invincibility, focused their interrogations on the seemingly mundane details of everyday Allied life. This profound strategic arrogance blinded the German commanders to the fact that the simplest questions about routine, the daily rhythm of the doomed convoys, were, in fact, the most dangerous questions they could possibly ask. The captured prisoner, terrified and physically exhausted, was about to become the involuntary human crib, and the fate of the entire war would soon hinge on a question about the time of the daily weather report. Imagine the scene. A U-boat, having just executed a successful sinking, surfaces in the churning, debris-strewn waters of the mid-Atlantic. The air is thick with the smell of diesel, salt, and burnt oil. Exhausted survivors, mostly American merchant mariners or young U.S. Navy sailors, are hauled onto the submarine's narrow, wet deck. They are cold, traumatized, and acutely aware that their fate lies entirely in the hands of the German officers standing before them. These captured sailors became the unwitting prize that Dönitz's command coveted. The German intelligence manual, confident in the unbreakable nature of Enigma, instructed captains to interrogate prisoners immediately. The German goal was not to uncover the D-Day invasion plans, but to gather tactical data to improve the U-boat's immediate hunting efficiency. The interrogations often took place right on the deck or in the cramped, dimly lit confines of the submarine's conning tower. The U-boat captain, typically a highly educated, often English-speaking veteran like Gunther Prien or Klaus Bargsten, presented an intimidating figure of absolute authority. The prisoner, shivering and desperate, was physically and psychologically at his lowest point. The German interrogators operated under a profound and fatal delusion. They believed their Enigma-encrypted communications were utterly secure. This massive strategic arrogance meant they wasted no effort on large, complex military secrets, which they assumed the prisoners would never reveal anyway. Instead, they focused on gathering local, specific, and seemingly harmless procedural details. The questioning was precise and relentless, focused on building a picture of the convoy's daily rhythms. Where did the convoy form up? What was the exact time? What was the ship's armament? How many escort vessels were with you? But the one line of questioning, the one question that would ultimately cost Hitler the Atlantic, centered on routine radio transmissions. The German captains needed to know the patterns of Allied communications to better predict when silence meant danger. And when a transmission was merely routine, the German commander would lean in and ask a series of questions about the ship's operational clock. At what exact time each day did your ship make its scheduled weather report? At what time did the captain transmit his routine safety check, and what message did he use? The Allied sailors, trained to protect major military secrets like convoy routes or destinations, had not been strictly drilled to safeguard these routine details. They reasoned that telling the captain the time of the daily weather report, a necessary, non-military task, might earn them better treatment or at least confirm their status as harmless merchant sailors. These answers were the atomic bomb of intelligence. When the American sailors confirmed that yes, the weather report, Wetterbericht, was always transmitted at 06 Zulu time, or that the captain's safety confirmation message was always sent at 12 Su p.m. using a standardized format, they handed the enemy exactly what Bletchley Park needed: the crib, the captain of the U-boat, meticulously logging this procedural data in his war diary, believing it only helped him confirm that the next transmission he intercepted at 06 Daum was, indeed, the weather report, was unknowingly feeding the most vital component to his greatest enemy. Back in Bletchley Park, the cryptanalysts, having received this procedural data via Allied sources, either from captured German reports or other means, now had the critical advantage. They could guess that the encrypted U-boat message intercepted at 0605 was highly likely to contain the German word wetter. This single known point, the human habit, the daily routine, was enough to allow the massive Bombay and Colossus machines to lock the four-rotor settings of the Triton Enigma. The irony was complete. The Germans, too confident in their machine, had used their prisoners' terror to obtain the very procedural details that were the Achilles heel of their code. The simple question, intended only to confirm a minor tactical detail, had cost them the strategic silence of the Atlantic. The fate of the war was sealed not by a technological defect, but by the unwitting answers of exhausted American sailors. The simple procedural answers extracted from terrified Allied prisoners on the decks of U-boats, the precise timing of a daily weather report, the standardized phrasing of a ship's status check finally provided Bletchley Park with the constant stream of cribs necessary to defeat the Triton Enigma. The long, agonizing blackout period that had plagued the Allies was over, and the intelligence gathered was about to unleash a strategic lightning bolt upon the German Navy. Within the high-security huts of Bletchley Park, the mood transitioned from despair to feverish, focused exhilaration. The captured code materials provided the cipher's mechanical rules. The procedural data obtained from the prisoners provided the crucial daily starting point. This combination, technology meeting the failure of human security, allowed the massive computing machines, the Bombays and the groundbreaking Colossus, to finally crack the four-rotor code with consistency. The resulting stream of decrypted, real-time U-boat communications, known as ultra-intelligence, was the single most vital military asset the Allies possessed. Ultra immediately began painting a detailed, terrifying map of the mid-Atlantic, the specific locations of Dönitz's U-boat wolf packs, their cruising speeds, their strategic objectives, and even the times they were scheduled to rendezvous for attack. The Allies could now read the enemy's mail before the recipient even opened the envelope. The strategic consequences were immediate and absolute. Allied convoys, which had previously sailed blind, were now guided by strategic lightning. U.S. Navy and British Admiralty commanders, often working directly with ultra-intelligence, could perform impossible feats. Convoys were expertly diverted around the deadly wolf packs, avoiding confrontation entirely. The U-boat commanders at sea were the first to feel the chilling, inexplicable shift. The rules of the game had been rewritten, yet the Germans were unaware the code had been broken. Their successful hunting strategies suddenly turned into deadly ambushes. U-boats would steam confidently toward a target area based on intercepted German intelligence, only to find the sea empty, the scheduled convoy mysteriously rerouted hundreds of miles away. Conversely, when a wolf pack gathered for a planned attack, Allied escort carriers and long-range patrol aircraft, equipped with new radar technology, would arrive with uncanny, devastating precision. The irony of the situation was profound. The U-boat captains, believing their Enigma security was sound, were convinced the Allies had developed an impossibly advanced radar system, or that their own crews were victims of widespread treachery. They never ever suspected that the simple, confirmatory questions they asked exhausted American sailors about daily routine, questions that confirmed the existence of standardized cribs, had handed the enemy their lives. This failure of imagination, this blind faith in the mathematical complexity of the machine over the security of the human element was the fatal flaw that doomed the German Navy. The collapse of German dominance reached its climax in May 1943. This month became known as Black May for the Kriegsmarine, a period of unrelenting, catastrophic slaughter for the U-boats. The coordinated Allied counterattack, guided by the continuous stream of ultra-intelligence, was merciless. Allied escorts knew exactly where to drop their depth charges. Aircraft knew exactly where to find the surfacing U-boats. In that single month, Dönitz lost 43 U-boats, a rate of loss that exceeded his ability to replace them and, more importantly, annihilated his corps of veteran captains. Dönitz, horrified by the carnage, was forced to confront an impossible reality. His naval reports consistently blamed technological failure and superior Allied air cover. He stubbornly maintained that Enigma was secure, declaring it absolutely unbreakable. Yet, with his fleet facing near-total annihilation, he was left with no choice but to issue the crushing order: withdraw the U-boats from the North Atlantic. The strategic victory for the Allies was immediate and irreversible. The supply lines to Britain were secured. The logistical artery of the war was flowing freely. The Battle of the Atlantic was won, not by brute force alone, but by the quiet genius of the Bletchley Park team, armed with the vital, continuous key unwittingly provided by captured American sailors. The cost of asking the one question had finally been tallied, and it was the cost of Hitler's dominion over the high seas. The Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, secured by the continuous flow of ultra-intelligence, created a profound and terrifying security crisis for the Allied High Command. The existence of the deciphered code was the single most vital secret of the war. If the Germans ever suspected that their Enigma code had been compromised, they would immediately change their procedures, plunging Bletchley Park back into darkness and handing the Atlantic back to the U-boats. The greatest threat to this secret were the men who had unintentionally revealed it. The captured American sailors and merchant mariners now held in German prisoner of war, POW camps. These men, though unaware of the significance of their mundane answers, were walking, talking liabilities. Their detailed testimonies, confirming the precise timings and standard formats of Allied radio transmissions, were the reason the four-rotor Triton Enigma had failed. The fear was that a captured POW, perhaps surviving a later mass escape or simply being interrogated one last time at the war's end, might somehow connect the dots between the German obsession with routine and the sudden, devastating Allied success in the Atlantic. The security protocols implemented by the Allies regarding Ultra were draconian and absolute. Only a tiny, select few, the highest-ranking commanders and a handful of intelligence officers, knew the true source of the intelligence. This circle of knowledge was strictly protected. When the war ended, the security measures surrounding these particular POWs became even more stringent. Upon their liberation and return to the United States and Britain, these sailors were greeted as heroes, yet they were immediately subjected to an intense, covert screening process. They were ordered to sign oaths and affidavits, swearing them to absolute secrecy about their experiences, particularly regarding the interrogation process on the U-boats. The orders were clear: never discuss the German questions. Never discuss the procedures of radio traffic. Never discuss the timings of the convoy reports. For these men, the war did not truly end in 1945. They carried a secret that was heavier than the gold they might have carried or the cargo they lost. They were not told why their survival was so vital, only that discussing their routine life on the sea could, even years later, compromise national security and endanger future military operations. They lived with the silent knowledge that while they were heroes, their unintentional betrayal was the key to the greatest strategic coup of the war. This silence continued for decades. For the American public, the victory in the Atlantic was attributed to superior technology, the invention of radar, better escort carriers, and the development of the depth charge. The contribution of the Codebreakers at Bletchley Park and the role of the POW's unwitting crib remained. Classified until the 1970s, the final irony of the Battle of the Atlantic is a double-edged sword: German arrogance. The Kriegsmarine was so utterly convinced of its Enigma's mathematical infallibility that it focused on the procedural vulnerabilities of its enemy, never imagining those mundane details could be the continuous key to its own downfall. Allied necessity. The Allies, in their desperate need, were forced to use the involuntary disclosure of their own men's procedural weaknesses to gain the decisive advantage. The captured American sailors, became the unsung heroes of a victory they never knew they won. They secured the victory not through torpedoes or depth charges, but through the simple, honest answers they gave to the one question that proved that even the most complex war machines can be defeated by the simplest of human flaws. Their silence became the ultimate safeguard of the victory they helped achieve. For the Allied governments, the end of World War II was not the end of the ultra-secret. The system that had cracked the Enigma code, the massive computing machines, the intricate methods, and the continuous stream of cribs derived from captured POWs was immediately repurposed and classified at the highest possible level. The reason was simple: the emergent Cold War. If the Soviet Union knew the Allies had successfully and systematically broken a complex code like Enigma, they would undoubtedly conclude that their own communication security could be compromised. The methods pioneered at Bletchley Park were too valuable to risk for historical clarity. This prolonged secrecy imposed an agonizing, decades-long burden on the American sailors and merchant mariners who were, unwittingly, the central figures in this intelligence coup. They had been rescued, debriefed, and sent home, but they carried a shadow with them. They were forbidden, under the strictest national security oaths, from discussing their interrogations, the specific questions the U-boat captains asked, or the procedural details of their lost convoys. They were heroes in public, but ghosts in private, forced to suppress the knowledge that their simple, honest answers had been instrumental in a global strategic victory. They had no idea why their weather reports and radio check timings were so sensitive, only that their silence was a non-negotiable duty. This internal conflict, the trauma of the sinking compounded by the burden of an inexplicable secret, defined their lives. The strategic Iron Curtain that shielded the ultra-secret finally began to fray in the early 1970s as key political figures passed away and the threat landscape shifted. The British government slowly began the process of declassification. The truth about Bletchley Park and the mathematical genius of Alan Turing exploded into public consciousness, shocking the world with the realization that the war had been won as much by cryptanalysis as by combat. However, the full, intricate role of the human element was slower to be revealed. While the machines received the credit, the full strategic significance of the POWs, unwitting cribs, and the fatal arrogance of the German interrogators were only confirmed later in the 1990s. As specific US and British naval intelligence reports were released, this slow unveiling was a moment of profound psychological consequence for the surviving sailors. They finally understood the years of inexplicable silence. They realized they were not just victims of the U-boat war, but vital, indispensable pieces of the Allied intelligence infrastructure. Their simple procedural confirmations, the answers to the one question, had been more valuable than a captured German general. For the US Navy veterans, this was the ultimate vindication. They learned that the enemy was defeated not by a failure of German engineering, but by a catastrophic failure of intelligence security doctrine. The Kriegsmarine believed so completely in the machine that they failed to protect the mundane routine surrounding the machine. The lesson became a permanent, foundational principle of global intelligence and naval security. The simplest, most repeated human procedure is the easiest and most continuous key to unlocking complex cryptographic systems. This profound realization fundamentally changed the way the US military trained its personnel. From that day forward, every sailor, soldier, and pilot was drilled not only on grand strategy, but on the importance of protecting even the most seemingly insignificant piece of operational data. The simple act of confirming the time of a daily radio check, the very thing that the U-boat commanders asked, was now classified as a major security breach. The story of the U-boat war, redefined by the revelation of Ultra, became a perfect, tragic example of how the human factor, both the overwhelming terror felt by the captured and the fatal overconfidence of the captors, ultimately dictated the strategic outcome of the Second World War. The Battle of the Atlantic was won in the silent, tense confines of the U-boat's conning tower years before the victory parade. The revelations surrounding the breaking of the Triton Enigma and the role of the American prisoners provided the ultimate, devastating assessment of the German failure in the Battle of the Atlantic. The technological race against the Allies was intense, but the war was lost in the operational arrogance of the German command. Admiral Karl Dönitz, throughout the darkest period of Black May, 1943 and beyond, held an unshakable faith in the infallibility of Enigma. His naval intelligence, the B-Dienst, was equally convinced, constantly searching for complex technological reasons for the U-boat losses, new Allied radar, advanced sonar, or massive concentrations of escort carriers. Because the B-Dienst occasionally managed to crack lower-level Allied codes, their confidence in their own security remained fatally high. Dönitz and his commanders never considered the possibility that the simplest point of data, the scheduled transmission time, the Wetterbericht crib, could be the continuous fatal flaw. This overconfidence was rooted in a fundamental misjudgment. They believed that the mathematical complexity of the machine transcended the vulnerability of the protocol and the human element. They were so fixated on the code's strength that they ignored its security perimeter. The story of the U-boat interrogations and the breaking of Enigma is more than just a historical footnote. It is a permanent lesson in the dynamics of modern intelligence. It demonstrates that the most decisive intelligence breakthroughs are often achieved through non-technical means, exploiting human predictability rather than mathematical weakness. The core concept, the human crib, became the gold standard for intelligence agencies during the subsequent Cold War. Intelligence gathering shifted its focus, not just to classified documents, but to establishing patterns, habits, and confirming mundane routines that could be leveraged against secure communications. The U.S. military learned to train its personnel to treat all operational details as equally classified, realizing that the combination of small, unrelated facts could easily build a comprehensive picture for the enemy. Today, the men who survived those brutal interrogations in the confines of the U-boat are recognized as the silent, essential heroes of the greatest secret war of the 20th century. They were the key that unlocked the German code, not by their technical knowledge, but by the simple, devastating irony of their survival. The Battle of the Atlantic was a war of logistics and code-breaking. But the ultimate victory was secured by the answers to the one question asked by a German U-boat commander, a question that cost Hitler his dominance of the sea and sealed the fate of the Third Reich.